Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming tonight to the Town Hall on homelessness. I appreciate you all being here tonight. I'm sure we all have our own reasons for being here and different reasons, which is great, but I'm sure we're all united in the fact that doing nothing is not an option for us regarding homelessness in San Clemente. So I first wanted to also mention that it's really important that we realize the fact that there's all faces of homelessness, and cities have to get involved along with the counties and states and federal government and nonprofits and organizations to come together and collaborate on this and connect people to resources with responsible compassion. I'd like to next invite Paula Cole, who is our chairwoman of the Human Affairs Committee for the City of San Clemente, to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Paula? Thank you so much, Paula. And I want to take a moment to recognize our tireless volunteers of the Human Affairs Committee. We couldn't have put this together without their help in coordinating and planning this event over the last few months. And also to the City Council for unanimously supporting Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain and I for wanting to co-host and moderate this event tonight. So if you're here, Human Affairs Committee members, I'd like to have you stand up. So Paula Cole and James Hamilton and Bill Ewing, Brenda Wells, Burton Wagner, Toby Huddle, and Tyler Bowden. Thank you so much. And also thank you to our esteemed panelists tonight. We have Mary Perdue of Family Assistance Ministries, Elizabeth Andrade of Mercy House, Gina Scott of Home Aid, Pastor Brenda Boss of Christ Lutheran Church San Clemente, Ed Manhart, Chief of San Clemente Police Services, and Scott Smith, the San Clemente City Attorney. So next, allow me to turn this over to Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain.
So I'm going to go against what my grandfather told me, which is to always stand when you're speaking in public, but it's going to be a long meeting, so I'm going to sit here for now. But I also wanted to recognize Sharon Campbell, who's in the audience from Assemblyman Bro's office. Sharon, if you could stand up. So hopefully I'm not putting her on the spot, but I know she has a bunch of good information about bills at the state level that are proposed in either the Assembly or the Senate that she can answer any questions on or educate folks if you wanted to catch her later on. So what I was asked to do is to kind of give an update on where the city is. You're here, so you obviously know that there is a homeless crisis, not just in San Clemente, but statewide and nationwide. And it's a big issue, not just for local jurisdictions, but for states and the federal government as well. So what is the city doing regarding homelessness? Well, first, we're having this town hall, and the idea here is to start a dialogue as a community about what we can do to engage in not just temporary fixes, which we have right now, but more long-term sustainable fixes going forward. And so all of our panelists are experts in this area that can provide you with great information. If you didn't get a chance to go out front, if you came in sort of the back or the side doors, there's a bunch of tables out there, the county's out there, and a number of other organizations handing out really helpful information that I think is key. So this is a much broader issue than just the city, so while I'm going to talk about what the city does, I hope you'll keep in mind that even looking more regional, we as residents of Orange County need to call for broader action. So most of you know that on May 21st, we adopted an urgency ordinance with a follow-up ordinance that designated a city lot off of Pico as a campground, and I stress a temporary campground. This is not a long-term solution. It was a solution that we felt was necessary for a variety of public health and safety issues, not just for residents that live in our community, but also the unsheltered individuals that were living down in North Beach and elsewhere. That lot has right now about 25 to 30 individuals who are camping. The lot is not full. I've seen reports that the lot is full. It is not full. It still has a great deal of capacity left. I have notes here, so I'm going to look down, excuse me. The idea behind that ordinance was not to prohibit every homeless person from being out and about in the city. I want to make that very clear. There's no laws that we can enact that can prohibit a person from walking freely around the city, just like you or I. So we get a lot of reports of homeless people walking around. That's great, but we can't do a lot about that. And just like you or I, there's certain civil rights that they have. What we did do and what we can do is sort of designate an area in the city where camping is allowed. And that's what we did. So if anybody wants to have a tent or they want to erect some sort of a structure with a tarp to shelter themselves, they're free to do so only at the lot in off Pico. They can't do that anywhere else in the city. Now, if somebody wants to sleep outside on the lawn or anywhere else in the city, they're free to do that on public property. We've not prohibited that, and we won't prohibit that. Again, just trying to deal with tent shelters. And the reason we did it that way is because, Ninth Circuit Authority gives us the leeway to deal with tents and structures, and it's a little bit more of a gray area in terms of people sleeping out in public. We've placed individuals from the campsite in the last couple of weeks in permanent supportive housing and other housing solutions. We've had social services coming in from the county once a week. We've had Mercy House going to the lot. So we've had some success stories there. We have 24/7 security. I know there's been a lot of questions about, can we lock the gates and keep them in there? No, it's a public park. They're free to come and go as they please. We do have 24-hour security for their protection, but also to make sure that everything on the site is being run in a good manner. There aren't any fights, there aren't any disputes, there's no property stolen. The rules that we've put in place there are being followed, so we're doing that 24/7 with private security. I think Chief Manhart will address this later, but we've noticed that the calls related to homeless issues in San Clemente have dropped significantly since we put the lot at Pico. I think part of that is the folks are now in an area where they can feel safe and not disrupted and out of the public eye somewhat. So it's been a good situation from the drop in service calls related to homeless issues as well. As I said before, the county is engaging with social services. There's a booth outside. County calls them the blue shirts. They go down and they meet with the homeless folks, try to connect them to resources, mental health resources, other resources, and it's been a phenomenal tool that the county's helped with, and we've been greatly appreciative of having that service come down. The next step is a homeless shelter. And there's been a lot of discussion about homeless shelters, both in the city of San Clemente and elsewhere. I think a lot of people are aware that there's been litigation for the past year and a half up in North County. Many of those lawsuits have now been resolved through settlements and have resulted in regional shelters in what's called the Northern Spa in Orange County. I think Costa Mesa has a shelter. Tustin just opened a shelter. Any ones I'm missing? Anaheim, Santa Ana. So a number of those shelters are starting to go online. There has not been a regional shelter down in San Clemente. And so my last 2 points I'm going to combine them, are the litigation that was filed against the city back in February. We've now been served with that lawsuit about 2 weeks ago. So we're going to have to respond to that lawsuit. And then simultaneously, we're looking at shelter solutions, as we said. I think for most of you that are following the city council meetings, we reported out a couple of months ago that we were going to look at shelter solutions. And on May 21st, we were presented with a couple of different options in terms of price range that were from $1.7 to $2 million. And that's sort of using the model that Costa Mesa and Tustin have utilized. I think our city manager called those the Cadillac options. And he did that for the reason that, there's been a number of ACLU lawsuits against Laguna Beach and other folks that have established shelters that maybe weren't quite up to par. The direction that we gave our city manager was, come back to us with some options that are somewhere in between $0 and $2.2 or whatever million that we can accomplish quickly in our SB2 zone, which is in Rancho San Clemente Business Park, which is the area that is designated for homeless shelters in the city. And also, we want to start a dialogue with our neighbors in San Juan Capistrano and Dana Point, and elsewhere, Aliso Viejo, about a regional shelter, much like the model that's being used up in North County. So we've started those dialogues. As you can imagine, having 3 different or 4 different cities and folks meeting takes time, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, but we're trying to move those discussions along as fast as we can. We've also had a lot of discussions with the counties. So long term, or I should say in the immediate term, the goal is to have a shelter option, because ultimately until we have a shelter option, we can't enforce our anti-camping laws, and we can't do a lot of the things I think that folks would like to see happen in terms of not just putting the homeless somewhere, but providing some services to get them off the street, mental health services, other services, and transition them into longer-term housing, which is the model that's being used county-wide to try to deal with this issue. So with that, we are going to have questions and answers. So if you'll go back to the back, there's a table that our Human Affairs Committee has set up that has sheets that you can write questions on. We're going to try to answer all the questions we can in the time we have tonight. If we don't get to all of the questions that were asked, we're going to post them on the website, all of the questions and answers for folks to take a look at. And then one final point, I know a number of you have asked for a frequently asked questions sheet regarding the PICO site. We do have that sheet. It's being updated with all the questions that we've been getting and more information as we get it. So that's going to be released very soon. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth Andrade at Mercy House.
I'll do this. Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Elizabeth Andrade. I am the Chief Operations Director with Mercy House. Mercy House has been in existence for 30 years, providing a broad range of services. We are a housing agency. We focus all of our services on ending homelessness by providing adequate housing. And the work that we've done in San Clemente is supporting those experiencing homelessness with outreach efforts, and that is engaging them where they are and providing them with case management. There's a lot around case management. It's a lingo term that we use in the industry here, and it really means that we are providing the resources to help support that individual to move them off the street, ideally into housing. Although sometimes it does mean that it is a process. We measure success with an outreach by number of engagements and progress towards goals. So there is a clear intention of what the process is. We have a full-time outreach worker within the city of San Clemente. We've been in the city for since 2018, providing that service. And one of the benefits of having Mercy House providing that effort is our integration with the entire system of care within Orange County. There is a lot of process that goes into obtaining housing. We're very well aware and knowledgeable of how to connect people to adequate resources, if those resources, of course, are there. And that's oftentimes one of the challenges, is being able to connect them to the right resource that's readily available. So there is assessments that take place through our efforts, trying to measure their need and match them to an appropriate intervention or support system. There's connecting them back to family and friends, so actually providing them the resource, the monetary resource to purchase the bus pass or pay for the gas card to get them back to a place where they will be connected to someone that they'll be under shelter or with support. We also, through case management, connect them to other county resources that may include behavioral health or medical health, food, whatever it is that will meet their immediate need. I want to emphasize the fact that it is a process. There is a lot of work that goes into engagement of the homeless, those experiencing homelessness, to gain trust and to, again, solidify the fact that we are working with them to gain access to housing.
So next is Mary Perdue, who's the Executive Director of Family Assistance Ministries. Mary?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain and Councilwoman Laura Ferguson, as well as our Human Affairs Committee for putting this on. Can you hear me? Also to everybody who's coming out in their evening, spending time to tackle and to talk about a serious issue and something that affects everybody. I was asked to speak on homeless prevention in particular. So BAM started in 1999. We started by a group of churches who saw that the funds, food, and everything collected in South Orange County were being sent to Central Orange County and distributed throughout, and while they thought that was nice, they kept saying we need more help in South County. And so they broke away, and the very first person that we helped was someone facing eviction. They received rental assistance and financial planning, and by the second month they were standing on their own 2 feet. And that's how we were born as a hunger and homeless prevention agency. So bridging that gap from dependency to self-sufficiency has always been part of BAM's core mission. Food was quickly added to that because we saw that if we could provide that near expiration food that we collect from local stores to people, they could take the money they would have spent on food and put it on their bills. So they're coached in that way. So for 20 years, we've been supporting the citizens of San Clemente in the city. We have a great partnership with the city. And the idea is we'd love to be able to get people to come in before they become homeless. That would be a better time. And we know that it's awfully hard when someone is facing hard times, they're trying to cure it on their own. Once they get that eviction notice, we oftentimes, most of the time I would say, people come in when it's the 3rd day of the 3-day eviction notice because they've been trying to scramble and figure out how to take care of it. So it's a pretty quick assessment we need to do, a pretty quick turnaround. How are we going to fund this? How are we going to take care of this? And it's always with the idea of, we've got this amount of money this month. How are we going to make it go as far as we can to help as many people as we possibly can? So that food component is super important. It helps alleviate some of their pressure for funds, and then they can put more of their funds on their bills. So you all know somebody in your family, maybe in your circle of friends, who are challenged with making some wise financial decisions. We've seen people walk into FAM asking for help for rent, and they're carrying a Starbucks coffee. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. But at that point, people are typically dealing about 12 points lower than their own IQ from stress. So the first thing we want to do is engage them in a financial assessment. First, let me back up. First, they tell their story, and often they cry. And then we start looking at their finances. So we look at their bank statements, we look at their income, their expenses, and we help them create a budget that's workable. Now we're engaging the logical side of the brain. It's income, expenses, bottom line, and now the real work begins. We have a whole tool chest of things that have helped for people over the last 20 years. And we think they're really brave to come in and tell complete strangers where they've messed up or where somebody else has perpetrated. Whatever the story is, we're going to listen without judgment, but then we're going to meet them where they are and help them take those next steps to get back to self-sufficiency. So, let's see. So the need in Orange County. There's 117,800 children living in poverty in Orange County. 1 in 6 kids are food insecure. The number of kids that live in shelters has increased 165% since 2006. And a worker needs to earn $27.62 an hour to afford the typical 1-bedroom in Orange County. That means a minimum wage worker has to work 105 hours a week in order to afford that typical 1-bedroom. So how do we do our work? We always start with diversion. When someone shows up at our door, we want to keep them out of the system any way possible. That's where Homeward Bound comes in. So with Homeward Bound, as you know, it's trying to find a family member, a friend, a program, somewhere where this person can get stable and have a connection. We can't give somebody a bus pass and send them on their way, because we don't like when other people do that, right? And because we are the border town, the end of OCTA, sometimes people are on a bus aimlessly going, and they end up getting off the bus here if it's the end of the line. So a week ago Saturday, I got a call from Deputy Zill. He had a 22-year-old who was in trouble because he was stealing food because he was homeless and starving. So he called us and said he's ready for Homeward Bound. So we were able to talk to his dad in Washington, and we were able to send him home. He was the 63rd person in 3 years that we've helped with Homeward Bound. The oldest was 80 years old, living in a car for 6 years. So if we can help people find their connection, that's the best thing. But what if somebody isn't a candidate for Homeward Bound? There is nobody for them, nobody that will take them in. We have Gilchrist House. So since 2003, we've taken in 853 homeless women and kids through Gilchrist House. This is homeless single women and homeless mothers with children. And the idea is we can get them in there, and now they're safely sheltered. We start working with them on increasing their income plan, a stabilizing plan. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time there, and then they're off to family. But other times, and most times, we have to help them reestablish a life. They're fleeing domestic violence, or something else has happened in their life and they have no other options. 2 years ago, we opened up Family House. It's the only emergency shelter for families in South Orange County. It's the only place dads get to stay in South OC. So we have single dads, single moms, dual parent households, and pregnant women. 232 homeless have gone through that program since March of 2017. We have 3 babies that have been born and another one who's on the way right now. So what's our impact? For 2018, 29,700 people have been helped through FAM just last year. It's 105,000 encounters. It's 1.6 million meals, or 1.9 million pounds of food, which equates to about $4.1 million worth of food and personal care items. We provided 3,524 case management hours for citizens of San Clemente alone, as people that just need someone to sit down and do a budget with them because they're a little bit lost. A senior who's never had to work a budget before, but their spouse has died, and they're a little stuck. We want them to come and see us. We want to help them with that. People come in one time, and they're on their way. 6 times is the average, but there are some people that are going to need to come the rest of their life. We had a mom whose son was at San Clemente High School. She would come in with one arm on him and one arm on her cane, sobbing, out of gratitude for the near expiration food we're giving her, but she was dying, and she just was trying to live through his last days in high school. It's heartbreaking, the things that we see. We also cry when we see that somebody's had a victory and they're no longer homeless, or they were able to stabilize and reunite. So a lot of the families in our shelters have been separated from their kids, and we help them get to court and get reunited. The courts know our program is good, and they'll give them custody of their kids. We also partner with the VFW to do the first stand down in San Clemente for our homeless veterans. These are mostly men who are stuck on the streets as veterans, and there's money out there for veterans. We want to make sure that we're getting them connected with those services. So we brought in homeless veteran services from North Orange County and Central Orange County, as well as Saddleback College's job search group. And we also called health department because that's when the scare of Hep was happening in San Diego, and we thought, well, let's not have that here. So we called the Orange County Health Department and said, we'd love you to come down and do Hep A shots, and they said, there is no epidemic here. And we said, no, we want to make sure there isn't one. So they came down and did that at FAM, at our stand down, as well as at one of our satellites. We also had some veterans show up at FAM and say, we need help on base. There isn't enough food on the base for these families. They're food insecure. And I thought, how can that be? So we checked it out, and sure enough, it was true. So 3 times a week now, we go to the base with food for our military families. The family's spouse is deployed maybe, or the spouse may be there, but they are so grateful for that food, and we have heard from their sergeant major that they have seen a tremendous decrease in the number of calls for MPs, as well as the number of decrease in the number of Marine and Navy chaplain calls, that there has been that much stress alleviated from the food helping with their finances. Remember, they get paid the same amount here that they get paid in another town where it doesn't cost as much to live. So a total of $1.2 million worth of food we've taken there since last March, or March of 2018 through 2018. 287 San Clemente seniors were helped last year, most of them to not become homeless. We have a really good program that we've had for about 15 years with the San Clemente Foundation, who only helps seniors, and they fund through us. And so we help with rent, we help with utilities, we help with transportation to get that car fixed, whatever it is we can do in order to help them remain stable and housed. How's my time? Because I could go forever.
You're
Okay.
good.
So one of the best things about FAM, of course, is to change lives. But one of the things I love about our business model is that we are agile. So when we hear about something happening at the moment, we want to be able to either make a course correction or figure out how we can help with that. Like calling the health department and saying, help us with Hep A shots. Well, there isn't an epidemic. We know. We don't want there to be one, right? Let's get ahead of it. Well, when we heard about the outlets and people were really upset about the concrete place coming, all we could think of is 2,000 jobs. This is fantastic, right? So we went down to the outlets, heard they were going to do 3 job fairs. We got their general application, and we went down to low-income housing. We borrowed headsets from the Department of Education to translate English into Spanish, and we did 2 workshops down there to help our citizens. We called them pre-job fair workshops, to help as many people as possible land those jobs that were coming at our outlets, right? We did 2 more of those at our place. We taught people how to dress and how to interview, did mock interviews with them. And then Sonic Burgers heard about it, and they called and they said, hey, we're going to open on the base. Can we come down and do a job fair? And I said, sure. And 2 of our homeless clients landed jobs at Sonic on the base. So the idea is, what are we doing? What can we change? What can we adapt? We received a call from our senior center here in San Clemente that said they were losing one of their food programs and they needed some more food. Could we help? You bet we can help. We can get food, we can find it. So BAM and Orange County Rescue Mission were part of the pilot agencies for the National Starbucks and Second Harvest Food Program. They wanted to test it out, see what it'd be like if they gave us a refrigerator truck and paid for staff and gave us a key to all the Starbucks. And we would go at night and pick up all that food, the fresh bistro boxes. So we said, you bet we'll do that. So we were part of that program for 6 months testing it, and then every year after we put a little skin in the game, so a little bit more of the funding that we have to raise to pay for it. But we now pick up from 71 Starbucks every single night, and those bistro boxes get to go to our kids in our shelters who get to go to school with a Starbucks bistro box, which makes them feel just a little bit more normal, right? We give those boxes to our senior center. We help with the homeless students at Saddleback College. So, and these also go to the Marine base. So wherever we can help and try to help people alleviate a little bit of their stress and financial tension, we're going to do that. Okay. Again, I could talk forever. I'm not going to. I'm going to tell you how you can help. Tell people about them. If you know someone in need, tell them about us. We want them to come in before they land on the streets, but we'll certainly try to help them if they've landed on the streets. Donate funds, food, clothing, household goods, and your time to volunteer. We have 3 churches in town. 2 have been doing this for over 10 years. They come once a month on one of the nights, the life skills class night at our shelters, and they make a meal and have it for our shelter residents. We have a group of moms and daughters who every week make lunches, just once a week, which is awesome, for our shelter residents. You know what that's like for a single parent trying to navigate living in a shelter, because you may be in one room with your 4 kids. Or you may be in a room, there's double bunks in the rooms, you may be in a room with your child and somebody else you just met with their child in the other bed. So it's a little bit stressful. It's not opulent, it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be safe and a place where they can relaunch. So people make lunches for them, that's wonderful. Jobs for seniors. We are finding more and more seniors who are willing and able to work, and they're not able to find jobs. They're in their 70s, early, mid, and late 70s, and they need some additional income because they just don't have enough to live on. We're supplying food. We've helped with medical costs. We've helped with rent. We've helped with utilities and transportation. Whatever we can, we will help to try to keep them stable. But can we always help? No. We run out of funds at times. We apply for grants. People donate to us. We have fundraisers. There are people out there who really have needs. And if you have a place that you can rent, you can rent for a little bit cheaper, let us know that. We'll help get somebody in there and we'll help teach them how to be a good tenant. The very first person we put in our permanent supportive housing program was a veteran on the streets for 40 years. He was in his 70s. He hadn't been housed for 40 years. We need to teach him how to be housed again, right? You have a dripping faucet, you don't not say anything because you're so grateful to have a roof over your head, but you say something because it's going to get worse, right? It costs money. So all sorts of things go into this. Best yet, come and take a tour. Sign up for our volunteer program. Come and see the place, take a tour, and find out what you can do firsthand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that. Next is Pastor Brenda Boss from Christ Lutheran Church. Thanks, Brenda.
So we're very grateful to be here as Christ Lutheran Church. We have been in San Clemente for 52 years on Camino Capistrano. It's where La Cocina Preschool is. And we've been worshiping at North Beach for 26 years. And because of that worship space on North Beach, we became the worshiping community closest really to ground zero in terms of homelessness. And I can't imagine being a church that's that close to the issue and knowing these people by name, by face, knowing their story. I can't imagine how it would have been if we would have ignored what was going on there. When I came to this church 5 years ago, we had a homeless member. Actually, he became a member while I was there. His name was Christian. And many of you knew Christian Moats in town. He'd been a resident of San Clemente for 37 years. Many people knew him, and he was now living on North Beach. And as I started serving this congregation, I saw that Christian would come in late on Sunday morning. He would usually bring flowers that he had clipped from the bushes around the train station, and he'd come and bring them at the altar. He'd interrupt in the middle of the service and walk down the middle of the aisle and leave his little thing of flowers. And he would bow reverently, and he taught us a lot about what it was to be sacred. And my congregants all welcomed him and accepted him however he was. Some Sundays he was drunk, and most Sundays he was not. But people said to me, I've actually started coming to church again because of Christian. I sat in the back row with him and said, I don't know that I should trust a church. I don't know if I should trust God. And Christian would say, this is a pretty good place. You should hang out. You should try it. I've had more people tell me that they engaged their faith because of this homeless man. Now, if you look at the picture on your far right, that's the funeral service for Christian. He died on our streets. He was actually in a hospital when he died, but too much exposure, too much addiction, too much hard life. He died, and we had 78 people at his funeral. Probably 20 were from the homeless community, and 50, 60 were people that knew him for a very long time. I tell you that story because he was part of us. The picture on the bottom is our most recent Palm Sunday service with 3 members of our congregation who are pillars in this community, longtime San Clemente residents, upper middle class, and a homeless guy, our friend Darren. And I want you to know that as well. It's not so much that we're just doing charity, we're just giving them things. They're part of our community and shape who we are. So it might surprise you to know that, you won't be surprised to know that people of religious communities think they should care for the poor. Of course we should care for the poor, right? I mean, Jesus talked about that, Buddha talked about that, Moses talked about that. Every religious community says we should care for the poor. But what might surprise you is that we also believe that we're called to be peacemakers. And so a key element of what my congregation does is de-escalate the situation. And so we see our guys at North Beach and now at Campsite, if we see these guys getting a little ramped up, we're not going to run away from them. We're going to walk towards them. Hey, what's going on? And call them by name and say, let's talk about what's happening. So part of how we are caring for our bigger community is to know these men and these women and their stories and their triggers and how to calm them back down and to try to help with that situation. We've also moved from charity, which is just pass them a few bucks, give them some food. We're moving towards advocacy. And this may be another thing that surprises you about the faith community. I don't think the church of the future is just going to sit in church and pray. The church of the future is going to come to town halls. The church of the future is going to be an expert on what the causes and the reliefs for homelessness are. We're going to know the statistics. We're going to know the players. We're going to know how we can take steps to improve and get people off the streets and into housing. So I'm part of the Faith Leaders Council for United to End Homelessness, which is the major campaign in Orange County headed by United Way to end homelessness. They told me today they hope to end veterans' homelessness by 2020, and they're on their way. This is for all of Orange County. And a big part of what they're asking the faith communities to do is to be experts and then to educate. So I go to my church, you go to your churches, your pastors, your rabbis, your imams, everybody talks to their faith communities and explains it's not homelessness, capital H. It's a guy who was adopted and then abused and then abandoned and lost his way. It's that weird kid from high school that nobody talked to, and then you found out that his mom was in the hospital. What do we do with those people now? So part of what the faith communities do is try to be experts on the causes and how we can help, know what everybody's doing all over town, all over the county, success stories on best practices, and then be in personal relationships with people who are suffering. Also listen to those who can't stand the homeless. Also listen to those who are furious and hold them and listen to them and honor them and say, how can we as a community work together? And then we're going to mobilize. People of faith are going to show up at city council meetings to say, actually, we want a humane solution. Actually, we want to be thoughtful about how we spend our money. Actually, we want to remind you again about the stories of those who suffer, but we want to come alongside you. We're not going to stand on some ivory tower and preach and pray. We're going to try to be in the streets with you, homeless and citizens, and figure out together how to care. And finally, the last thing that was really in our wheelhouse is spiritual resiliency. This work is hard. We all get exhausted. We all get angry. And so the faith community can be part of spiritual resiliency, community, prayer, compassion, love, mindfulness. These are the gifts that the faith community can bring. The last picture I have on this particular screen, way down at the bottom, you may not be able to see it. It's a person putting a quarter in a laundry machine. At Christ Lutheran and St. Clement's by the Sea Episcopal Church, we have Laundry Love, which happens once a month, in which we pay for the laundry to be done of people who come into a laundromat in South San Clemente. This started many years ago when there was an Episcopal church in, I think, Huntington Beach, who asked a local homeless man, how can we help you? And he said, I think if I had clean clothes, people would treat me with more dignity. And so they started helping homeless people have clean clothes. Mary Purdue and I talked about this a couple of years ago, and she said, yes, we need to help the single men who are homeless and have dirty clothes, but we also need to help working families, people in need. And that was really what this ministry became. And now we have dozens of women with young children who come in with every sheet, every blanket in their house once a month to get everything washed. And we realize what a gift that is for people who are working poor, who are on the edge, who have, how are you going to spend $40 washing your sheets when you don't have enough money? And so Laundry Love is also part of what we're doing. Practical applications, advocacy, education, and relationship. And so that is what we are doing as Christ Lutheran Church, but it's what we're calling all of you who would like to participate in caring and doing something that can move us all forward together. So thank you.
Yeah, so next we're going to have Lieutenant Ed Manhart, who's the Chief of Police Services here in San Clemente.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about a couple things. First of all, in law enforcement, we have two roles with working with the homeless, and we balance outreach efforts, and then we also have enforcement efforts. So I'm going to talk first about outreach efforts. Many of you probably know Deputy Dave Zill has been in the San Clemente Police Services for approximately 5 years, has done an outstanding job. Well, in law enforcement, when you do a great job, people want you. And fortunately for him, he has been selected to join the Aero Bureau, and so he will be leaving us shortly. But that being said, I'm going to take this opportunity. In the back, we have Deputy Mussig, and she's new to the city, but what I want to explain is, thank you. What Deputy Mussig has to bring is that she was at Ground Zero in North County in dealing with the Santa Ana Riverbed, and she has a lot of experience and a lot of expertise and training. So the good news is, although we are going to miss Dave, as you guys know, Dave has a great attitude and he's a great guy, but I'm very fortunate to have Deputy Mussig stepping in, and she's going to do a great job for us. And so with that, what we currently do, what we have been doing every week with schedules pending, is we work with Mercy House. The deputies, you'll hear me say HLO, Homeless Liaison Officer is what we refer. Deputy Mussig and Deputy Zill, they are full-time, 40-hour employees, and that's what they do. And what they get to do is they work with Mercy House. They do perform outreach efforts and to help provide any services that they can. And we will continue those efforts. Before we had the camp, deputies were doing that, and now with the camp, the deputies are doing the same thing, and that will continue. We have no plans to stop that as well. Now let's talk about enforcement issues. Let's break this down into out in the public. So I know Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain had mentioned with the urgency ordinance, you are not allowed to erect a tent, an awning, a makeshift structure in the city unless it's in that camping area. So what we do is my goal, my personal goal is to get absolute voluntary compliance. I do not want to issue citations. I don't want to arrest anybody. I want them to take those tents down, and then if they want to take it over to the city yard where it's at the camp, they can do so. If they do not adhere to our wishes, then we will enforce and we will cite and enforce that. And but that's not my goal. But it is what it is. Now let's talk about the camp. The camp is public property. Everyone in this room can go in there. My deputies frequently go in there. They go in there, they enforce narcotic use. They enforce those that have warrants. They effect arrests. So that those efforts aren't any different than how it was at North Beach or any other area in the city. And those efforts will continue. As Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain mentioned about the call volume, I know we started, was it like May 24th, where we opened up, but I can assure you, I have not had a victim report a crime inside the area, which to me, public safety is the most important part, and we haven't had that, and our call volume has dropped significantly. So I know everybody has an opinion one way or the other about how it is. I'm just telling you from my perspective of how it's affecting the sheriff's department, and that to me that's a good thing right now. But I want you to understand. I know when this went into effect, I still received many of the emails and hey, this is this situation over here. The sheriff's department, we do not move anybody. You are allowed to sleep in public. You're allowed to lay there. You just can't have those tents. So we do not move anybody. We educate. There have been a couple of situations where some individuals that weren't from the city did not know about the urgency ordinance, and so we educated them and said, hey, you just can't have the tents, and it worked out perfect. They complied, and matter of fact, they went to the camp area, and it worked out, and that's how I'd like this to continue, and that's the effort that we're going to do. So I'll pass it along. I'm sure you guys have probably 100 questions, and I'll just address each one as you guys shoot them off. Thanks.
So we're going to go out of order from our agenda, but next is going to be Gina Scott, who's the Interim Executive Director at Homemade Orange County.
Thank you. So Homemade's mission is to end homelessness, and we do that simply by providing housing for the nonprofits that are out there really helping the homeless. We were actually started 30 years ago, actually incorporated today, June 12th in 1989. So it is our 30th anniversary. And 31 years ago, we had a nonprofit come to the home building industry, which is a trade association made up of home builders and everybody that helps build new homes. And they were gifted an old farmhouse, and they asked the building industry if they could renovate it so they could serve families experiencing homelessness. And the idea of our unique model of our agency coming out and helping to develop housing was actually born out of that pilot project. And so in our very first year, we actually came down to the city of San Clemente, and you were one of our first pilot projects that happened in we went to each supervisor district, and Anchor House, which is no longer operating here in the city, was one of our first projects that we helped renovate. It was a small apartment building for families that were homeless. And since then, we have done a couple other projects. We have worked with Friendship Shelter. We have worked with a domestic violence shelter in the city, and we have worked with FAM. So back in 2016, we actually brought Taylor Morrison Homes to the table and helped renovate the family house here in San Clemente. That's a 42-bed, 4 apartments that are close, Mary, 36-bed. That's actually helping families in an emergency situation. And how we do that is we help bring all of the resources together so we can actually develop that for less than it would have cost Mary and her team. And so I believe that project all in, including the renovation costs and all the furniture, it would have cost them close to $500,000, and I think it only cost you about $100,000. Besides the purchase. I love how she's going to help me along with this. But what I also want to let you know is that developing emergency housing or housing for the homeless in your community isn't scary. Homemade has actually developed 63 different projects in the community, and we attribute 65,000 lives have been changed because of that. And I sit back and think, because I've been with the organization for over 22 years, I can't imagine what the climate in Orange County would look like had we not been started. Had that first project not been approved and people embraced it and said, we're going to welcome you and bring this into the community and really make sure that we're out there doing what we need to do, which is providing housing. The other interesting thing that we have done as an organization is we actually purchased and open and operate, we don't operate, Mercy House actually operates for us, our family care center in the city of Orange. This was the very first project in the county to utilize the SB2 zone, to be able to come in and find a property within that zone to be able to really help the homeless. And it has been a wonderful project. We've been open nearly 2 years. We've served 200 families and nearly 700 individuals since we've been open. And I'm very proud to say that that is a flagship project that's really out there doing what it should be, getting people out of crisis and getting them stable. And so we hope that we can help this city. You were part of our beginning, and we love to help you really move forward with what you need to do and bring our time and talents here to help you really end homelessness. Thank you.
I'm Scott Smith, the city attorney, and so a lot of my thunder's been stolen by the mayor pro tem and the lieutenant and others, but I wanted to explain for you a little bit the legal platform that the city's found itself working on to address the consequences of homelessness and what that means to our community. And so I'm kind of the messenger here. I don't own or support the message. It's just the legal parameters that we've been working with. And to start out, I'll just tell you that several years ago, there was a decision that came out of the city of Los Angeles. A plaintiff named Jones, who was experiencing homelessness, sued the city of Los Angeles for arresting him for violations of its anti-camping ordinances. And that case, in that case, it went up on appeal. And ultimately, in a decision that was later vacated, the Jones court said that nope, the city of Los Angeles could not cite someone for public camping. Until these two things happened, the city provided shelter to that individual, and that shelter was provided in a number equal to the city's point in time calculation for the number of homeless people estimated to be resident or non-resident in the city of Los Angeles. We thought in looking at that case it was kind of strange for a court to be exercising really a legislative function, i.e. telling the city of LA that it had to construct and operate shelters, and B, that the number was pegged to sort of this random number about how many people on one given night in the city of Los Angeles found themselves homeless. Well, we stopped worrying about that case because it was vacated, and on appeal, the city of Los Angeles settled that case, and so we tried not to think or worry about it until last year, when the Ninth Circuit adopted it wholesale. In this opinion, decided against the city of Boise, Martin v. Boise. In that case, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals took that Jones decision that I told you about and adopted it as applying to California and several other western states in the Ninth Circuit. That holding is based on this first tenet, which has a typo in its notes, but the Eighth Amendment prohibits the state from punishing an involuntary act or condition if it's the unavoidable consequence of one's status or being. So if I lack mental awareness, and that leaves me on the streets of San Clemente or if for whatever reason on any given night I lack shelter and I am overcome with fatigue and fall asleep on a park bench, the city and the sheriff as its enforcement agency cannot criminalize that condition of my lack of awareness or my being overcome by fatigue and falling asleep someplace. The court then goes on to say what the Jones case said. This principle compels the conclusion that the Eighth Amendment, that's being free from cruel or unusual punishment, prohibits the imposition of criminal penalties for sitting, sleeping, or lying outside on public property for homeless individuals who cannot obtain shelter. Although Boise had some shelters, the court found that they were not adequate. In one case, you had to pass a religious litmus test to be sheltered there. The court found that the shelter had to be in the jurisdiction of Boise and that it had to be a low barrier shelter. In other words, you had to be able to come and go regardless of your condition without pre-qualification or a requirement that you stay there a long time and, for example, submit to treatment or rehabilitation. So we and the city council, as these conditions were kind of mounting in San Clemente, decided to look at that Boise test and to kind of take its elements apart and decide if it could be met in San Clemente if we were to enforce the city's regulations that prohibit public camping. There was an interesting footnote. I'll give the mayor pro tem, who's also a lawyer, not a second guesser, credit for really focusing on this part of the decision, where it says, nor do we suggest that a jurisdiction with insufficient shelter can never criminalize the act of sleeping outside. Where shelter is unavailable, an ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at particular times and particular locations might well be constitutionally permissible. So in response to that decision, and especially that last footnote, there's one last case, Cade, if you could switch to it, that supported that decision in Oakland and said that Martin does not establish a constitutional right to occupy public property indefinitely at plaintiff's option. This was a camp or an encampment, an ad hoc encampment in Oakland that the city was shutting down and was allowed to do that because other options were available. So in response to this case law and kind of the growing condition in San Clemente that was afflicting the general public and its quality of life and quality of health and safety, and also afflicting the homeless population in San Clemente with many of the same symptoms and ills, the city of San Clemente City Council decided to explore both these options. One is the provision of shelter beds in permanent shelters. As was indicated earlier, because of constraints imposed on North County cities in litigation there, those options, the option of permanent shelters, are really expensive. It's calculated that those fit to Judge Carter's liking, and the plaintiff's demands up there would cost San Clemente something in the realm of $1.5 to $2 million annually to operate, not just provide. So the city council has pursued the alternate strategy, which Mayor Pro Tem Bain indicated earlier, which was to look at maybe one or two of the least impactful areas where people might be directed or requested to camp when there's no shelter available and when the city wants to enforce its anti-camping municipal code throughout the city. As was indicated earlier, the city yard was identified on Avenida Pico as the place with the most appropriate zoning, the appropriate ownership, safety, and relative isolation from neighbors in close proximity to transit and where those occupants had been sleeping previously, and was chosen on an interim basis to alleviate the critical conditions that the council identified in its urgency ordinance 2 meetings ago. The council also asked that Tuesday night ordinance is sunsetting that opportunity be brought to the council, and intends to work aggressively to looking at perhaps permanent or maybe geographically more suitable opportunities to replace the Pico yard. So to summarize, my job and the city's legal objectives are to enforce the city code. I'll confess that a couple of summers ago, I had a long book. It got a little boring. I think it wasn't War and Peace. It was Gabriel Garcia Marquez book that was kind of long. And I will confess to the crime of falling asleep on the lawn of the Ole Hansen Beach Club. It was a glorious afternoon. The city can't criminalize that. They can't let me skate and cite the next guy who's not from town. But, as the chief indicated, when someone erects a structure with 27 cubic yards of storage on that lawn, that's something different from just falling asleep and enjoying the afternoon sun. And so we intend, along with other crimes that don't relate to status, like violence on each other or public urination and the like, those codes will be enforced in the city, as will camping. We want to encourage county, state, and nonprofit welfare institutions, especially the county that has money especially granted to it from the state, to partner with the city in looking at long-term solutions. And then to, as I said, identify, authorize, and prioritize interim transitional campsites to minimize health and welfare impacts on the larger community and on its homeless population. And then my job, as was indicated earlier, is to try to stay as close to the legal principles enunciated in Martin v. Poissy as possible so that we can defend the city's right to do this, but also protect it from exposure to unnecessary civil rights damages. It's a fine line to walk through this gray area about asserting our right to enforce our code and not paying damages awards for doing that clumsily or recklessly. And I know you appreciate that tension. I just wanted to recognize some partners in doing that, and then I'll close. As I indicated, we have a mayor pro tem who's a good lawyer, creative, and not a second guesser. We have a city council who has a long attention span and is committed to understanding the legal principles and the parameters that we have to deal with. It's interesting that the entire county, well, Leon Page, county counsel himself, and his 3 assistants who worked in defense of the county's lawsuit relating to homelessness, all live in San Clemente. So they have been very cooperative and very willing to rise to the occasion when we need them to listen or be a sounding board or even assist in what we've done. And then there's a joint defense group of South County cities that are assisting the city of San Clemente in paying its defense of the lawsuit that was mentioned earlier. There's a joint defense group that has as its members the city of Lake Forest, Laguna Hills, Aliso Viejo, San Juan Capistrano, and Rancho Santa Margarita, where even cities that aren't named are helping us to defend our right to enforce the code and preserve the quality of life here. That's it for me. I'll be ready for questions. Yeah, as the posture of that case right now is it's been served. Those cities in joint defense engaged an internationally capable and acclaimed law firm, Jones Day, to defend to handle the joint defense. And so that lawsuit has been filed and served on the cities. They're preparing their defense in the first volley. The cities have submitted a request that Judge Carter not hear our case. Judge Carter's done a great job rolling up his sleeves and getting involved in the North County case and brokering it to kind of tentative settlement. But because he had been so involved personally and offline with the plaintiffs in the case, Jones Day on our behalf has asked that that be assigned to a different court and a different judge, our case. And then anyway, the first pleadings in that case are due on July 10th, and then the court at that point will set, whichever court ends up hearing it, will set the case for hearing. So far, they haven't sought a temporary restraining order against the city for its activities. I think personally that the reason they haven't done that is because, as the chief indicated, those occupants and those persons in our community who are suffering the effects of homelessness are in fact much better off than they were 4 or 6 weeks ago. But we'll knock wood that that the advocates in the case understand and appreciate what these groups and what the city have been doing to better the welfare of the city and those individuals that are camping there.
So thank you to our panelists, and now everybody's favorite time of the evening is the question and answer session. We have lots of questions for Laura and I, and fewer questions for everyone else. So what we're going to try to do is spread these around to the extent that we can. And again, we have about an hour to get through these questions. Hopefully we can get through them. If not, questions that aren't answered, we will post and answer them on the city website along with all these other questions. So if you have questions, please get them to us on a written card so we can still answer them to the extent they don't get answered. So we have a community question that we'll start with. It's kind of for the panel. And whoever wants to jump in first, be my guest. What service for the homeless do you feel is missing? Any takers on that particular question? What service for the homeless do you feel is missing?
Well, the biggest thing is the appropriate mental health help. You've got people that in the old days would have been in a facility, and there are no facilities. So what do? You know, the number one cause of homelessness is not mental health or addiction, but those who are staying on the streets longer, it's because of those things. So we need some way, some place. If we do a 5150 on someone, they're in for 72 hours, and then they're out, saying that they're okay, and yet they're stuck.
Okay. Anyone?
I'll reinforce what I said earlier, is the housing continues to be a real struggle. We can surround with the supportive services that we have to offer. We can be intentional about doing so, but without appropriate housing, it will continue to be a pressure point.
Great. There's a follow-up component to this. What group committee is studying the issue in terms of what additional services are missing or needed to address homelessness?
What group or committee is studying it?
Yeah, studying the issue.
Excellent question. There are a lot of advocates all over the county. I know our agencies, along with Homemade and faith-based communities, are at all of the county meetings. We've been to Washington, D.C., to some of the national meetings. There's lots going on all across the country, but to get something enacted is huge. It's a big deal, and to get everybody to cooperate together, to row in the same direction is really difficult. So who is it? I think the county sort of leads the charge. The bulk of the funds that come from the government are from the county. When you talk about grassroots movements, it's all of us, right? All of you. We're all doing things the best we can, but we really, if there's going to be a big change, it's going to have to come from a bigger pocketbook.
Great.
Can I add to that too? I think we've asked a little bit about that within the city government, and I think that you two especially have been working hard to educate yourselves and get up to sort of speed as to what the most best practices are. But I would certainly call for a more intentional committee. You said human affairs, the people that put on this tonight, but I think that would be an important thing to really task people like this is your number one goal. And I would very much ask for that.
Thank you. Just one quick one. I would also encourage you to get plugged into the county effort around the Commission to End Homelessness and the Continuum Care Board. That's the county body that oversees the $24 million that comes to Orange County each year to support the supportive services and the development of permanent supportive housing. There's a lot that's being done. There's a lot of academic research that's being done and supported with universities like UCI and Cal State Fullerton. So there is an academic component of it. How do we know to measure what we're doing and appropriately display that it's working? And so that's, again, the Commission to End Homelessness and the Continuum Care Board.
Thank you. This question is directed towards Mercy House. How long is the process for Mercy House to meet with the homeless person, to actually getting them off the street and into housing?
So this isn't a popular answer, but it really does depend on the situation. Our approach is to tailor our response to the needs of the person experiencing homelessness. And it really could be as quick as one interaction. All they need is a bus pass to get somewhere, to a long-term relationship where we are continuously engaging them, following up, encouraging them, working on their housing plan. So it varies on the level of need, but we are assessing them for what the right resource or what the right services are. And so a lot of it is driven by that assessment.
And a follow-up question to that would be to Mercy House. Do you have any numbers to substantiate how many of the homeless in San Clemente want a shelter to go to and how many want to stay outside and be free?
So I don't have that data in front of me. That's not something that we typically measure. The resources that we provide them are tangible resources, so we wouldn't necessarily be offering them a shelter if there is no shelter available. And so with the recent activity in the campsite, that is something that we, I'm sure, are utilizing and are advising as an option. But again, with our outreach efforts, our focus is on housing. And so the menu of services is provided to them and it's incorporated in their housing plan.
Thank you.
I can answer that for San Clemente, but the only city I know of that has a program like ours, which is a managed camp and a portfolio of shelters, is the city of Santa Cruz. And so in Santa Cruz, if they pick you up, you have the choice, and they have learned that 70% of the people contacted would rather be in an open camp than in a shelter, for whatever reasons, and they're trying to get to the bottom of that, Laura, and figure out why.
So, Lieutenant Manhart, so the question is, what can and can't you legally do to clear the streets of the homeless population? I think you touched on that earlier, but what can and can't you legally do to clear the streets of the homeless population?
Can't clear the streets of the urgency ordinance that we've established in the city. We can enforce the destruction of the tents. So we're not moving anybody, not telling anybody where to go. And I explained this already, if they're sleeping in the public without the structures, they're allowed to do that. So as far as homelessness, there isn't anything that the sheriff's department's going to do regarding that.
Okay, this question is directed to the city. What are the timelines for when San Clemente's needs to have a homeless shelter? Legally, we haven't been given a timeline, correct, Scott, to erect a temporary emergency homeless shelter, but we are looking to do that. We have directed the city manager to look for a site for a temporary emergency homeless shelter until a regional approach to housing those who are homeless can be found. And I did exchange emails with him today, and the goal is to have that by November. So that's what I learned from an email today from the city manager, so that's a good goal. As Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain mentioned, the campsite is interim, and we're bringing back the ordinance to the next meeting so that that ordinance includes specifics that it will be an interim campsite for 6 months to no longer than a year.
So can I just add, there's, I think, a misconception that there's an order from the court that we have to build a shelter, or that there's state or federal laws that say we have to build a shelter. We don't actually have to build a shelter. What the court has said in northern county cities, and hopefully doesn't say to us, is he's issued a temporary restraining order on those cities saying you cannot enforce your anti-camping ordinances unless and until you have sufficient beds within your jurisdiction, as Scott said earlier. to provide for your homeless population. So there is no order, there are no timelines, but we've heard a lot from the community that the situation that we had in North Beach and elsewhere was untenable, and it was because we had a lot of camping everywhere, blocking of access. So that is sort of the situation on the ground. It's not that you have to build something, but it's if you want to enforce your anti-camping ordinances, you're going to need a shelter, if that makes sense. So let me find, all my cards got all messed up. So this one's to FAM and Mercy House and Home Aid. What are you doing to help with mental health? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part is, how are you following up once placed into permanent supportive housing?
So we do heavily lean on the county services through the healthcare agencies. So the Blue Shirts are a great partner. We oftentimes create a continuity of care. So if our outreach workers are out with law enforcement and the person experiencing homelessness is open to services, we look to engage and really partner in that service. Once someone is receiving access to permanent supportive housing, that permanent supportive housing is tied to an agency who's providing the services that will go along with that unit, that apartment. And so they're receiving ongoing care from them. So Mercy House operates permanent supportive housing. So from outreach, somebody who's identified on the street, connected to resources, connected to permanent supportive housing, they would at that point receive access to a case manager for that property, and they would receive long-term care and support through that individual.
BAM has the same answer on the first one. We do rely on the county for the mental health services. We also opened up our conference room every Monday and we have an MOU with the county to provide social services on site in San Clemente, because to get somebody up to Santa Ana for help for any social services is 3 hours, 3 buses, something. And so they see social services on Mondays, and then if they need to call a CAT team or someone with mental health the department from the county, they'll call them in and see them on site at FAM, or they'll see an outreach with Mercy House. For permanent supportive housing, we have 10 permanent supportive housing apartments that are scattered sites in another city, and we go up every week. We started with the BI-SPDAT or assessment on the streets, and we're able to find 10 who really needed help. We now have had 13 people in permanent supportive housing. These are people with a mental or physical disability. I mentioned earlier the first person we got into permanent supportive housing was a veteran on the streets for 40 years in his 70s. He's doing great. He's been in there for 2 years. We know that it's a 100% reduction in law enforcement calls for somebody put in permanent supportive housing. It also costs 50% of what it costs to have somebody on the streets. So our case manager goes up every week, makes sure that they are staying on the meds, getting to their doctors, acclimating to their community, do they have the food they need? And so it's a weekly case management commitment that we have made to these 13 people.
Right, and for Home Aid, I know that countywide it is needed, we need about 2,700 permanent supportive housing units. It will take a while to get those built, and it is our goal to try to develop as many as we can and help partner with agencies and cities to get that work done.
Maybe several of you can weigh in on this one. How is it that we, the state, the county, has experienced prosperity, but homelessness continues to grow and seemingly has no solution in sight?
I think it's a societal problem that we aren't taking care of each other. I mean, and that's, right, the pastor gets to say that, but that's.
Okay, I'll let.
Mic drop.
Here's a question on shelter function. Are homeless shelters exempt from state environmental law such as CEQA, that's the California Environmental Quality Act, and the EIR? And I know if they're in the SB2 zone, people can erect a shelter by right and be exempt from going through the burdensome, lengthy permit process. But I'll let Mayor Pro Tem Dan Bain elaborate.
I'm going to let Scott elaborate.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, they're subject to state environmental laws. There may be exemptions that apply if they're for urgent situations or if they don't involve structures. But yes, the normal rules apply, and so does zoning. And we have what Councilmember Ferguson referred to as an SB2 zone. All the city can demand there of an applicant who wants to build a shelter is a non-discretionary building permit application. If shelters are to be constructed or erected elsewhere, the city has to conduct zoning review and to make sure that it's consistent with the zoning. And we have a big variety of zoning codes, specific plans. They differ a lot from site to site in the city, but everywhere else, environmental and zoning laws do apply.
So this is a longer question, so bear with me, but it says, I've heard a lot of talk of a South County regional shelter being built in San Clemente and about the RSC Business Park, so Rancho San Clemente Business Park, donating 10 acres for it. Also, to overcome the need for a vote to convert open space to a shelter, that the Rancho San Clemente Business Park would give it to the county who wouldn't need to obey San Clemente rules. How true is this information? Of course I get this question. So I'm gonna tag team this with our city attorney. But there was a proposal that was made by the Emergency Shelter Coalition's representative, his name's Ed Connor, at the last city council meeting, who they have proposed this sort of idea at Del Cerro off of Pico, of the 10 acres that's owned by the Rancho San Clemente Park. They would build a 75-unit emergency shelter with permanent supportive housing at that location. So just on that basis, and as originally proposed to us, it was proposed by a private party. San Clemente has a Measure V, which says that any open space area, which that is, would require a citizen's vote in order to change the zoning. So what Ed came back to and proposed at the last city council meeting was, what if it was given to the county? This is where I'm going to hand it off to the city attorney.
Or I'll say those are facts, not an evidence. The county is, generally speaking, is an agency of the state, and the state is not subject to local zoning if it chooses to disregard it. The county of Orange, however, and Supervisor Bartlett specifically, have been very disinclined and very reticent to override local zoning laws. This issue was a possibility in Santa Ana, where the county was, in fact, the proponent and advocate and applicant for a shelter there that was contrary to the city's zoning. And the county did not push that over the city's objection. So that's why I say these are facts, not an evidence. Measure V applies to the city of San Clemente, certainly. It applies to nonprofit and private applicants that might want to build stuff in open space. It doesn't apply to the county, but the county has shown no indication or any willingness, not just here, but ever, to override local zoning in order to build shelters or even any other county facility.
Okay, this one's a lengthy one. I have lived and owned my home within 1 block of this community center. I get home late, up to 2 a.m. I have found homeless, hiding, sleeping, passed out, all around the library. I have seen them passed out from, ? But from this meeting, I am hearing nothing will be done. I have called to have them removed from my property after they sleep, pissed and pooped on my property. Nothing is being done. No police came. I find from this meeting nothing will be done. Seems like all the meeting is to tell people who own our homes to pay our taxes. We have to pay for these homeless who contribute nothing to this city. I do not want to see San Clemente become a cesspool like LA, CM, Santa Monica, and SF, all which who now feed the homeless. Who would like to respond first?
at any time, if there's somebody sleeping on your property or private property, call us. And I'll tell you right now, if a deputy does not respond, email me, let me know. I want to know as soon as possible. On private property, you can enforce that, and you can sign the private person's arrest form and have them for trespassing. On public property, that's separate. You guys obviously know the difference that we can't do that. And as far as coming back, well, then we can continue to issue the citations, and that's the way that we can enforce it. It's unfortunate, but that's the legal approach that we have to this problem. Yes.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Would that be a 911 call if somebody's sleeping in my backyard?
So here's what I have to tell you about for safety issues. If you feel that that your safety is in danger or your family member, then you call 911. When I came up from ECB, Emergency Communications or Dispatch, the same person who handles 911 calls handles the non-emergency line. The first question they're going to ask you is this an emergency? If you accidentally dialed the wrong number, which was 911, they're going to immediately transfer you onto the next line and still continue the call. So don't worry about that. But if you feel in danger, call 911 and let the dispatcher figure out which avenue will go on that.
So I just wanted to follow up as well, because we get a lot of emails, Facebook tagging, all that stuff, saying, hey, this person did X, Y, or Z, what can we do? And I had to be educated from Lieutenant Manhart that a lot of times when you report something, you need to stick around and you need to sign off and be a witness. Is it a declaration? I'm not sure what is signed, so that it can actually be enforced. If you're unwilling to stick around and be a witness and enforce it, then it doesn't get enforced. So, for example, we've had a lot of complaints about bikes being stolen. And what are you doing to make sure that all the bikes down at North Beach and elsewhere aren't stolen? Well, the first thing we can do is ask the deputies to go down there and check the bikes, but if they're not reported as stolen, then there's nothing that can be done about it. So if you lose a bike, report it. If something happens, report it. If you have somebody pooping and peeing on property or you see it, report it and be a witness. There has to be more than just simply vocalizing that something was done. You've got to actually follow up and sign off. And that's been a big issue, is you'd be shocked at how few people actually follow up. And instead they go to Facebook and they tell everybody about it, but they don't follow up. And that's a very critical component that's missing, that gives our deputies the ability to enforce some of this stuff. So it's my turn for a question. So here's a question. Would the city be open to a public-private partnership? Our family will purchase a building for the city and build a shelter. We did it in Anaheim. We want to be a catalyst. So I appreciate this question. Yes. I spoke to this person's, I don't know if it's father, brother, husband. We did meet with this person. There's been a lot of great work that has been done by private individuals. We've had a lot of very, very generous private individuals look to partner with the city, and we are interested. We will take all those meetings. It needs to work with our zoning. It needs to work with our laws, but we are interested in that, and the city is certainly not going to turn away a public-private partnership in that manner. So I think the short answer is yes. Scott, did you have anything to add? Yeah. So I think that's a good question. Thank you.
How many homeless people were on the street before opening the new homeless camp? And how many of them are living in this camp now? We have 30 now as of the weekend. And where are the others that did not go to the camp?
Chief? So I'll just say real quick, I know there's 25 to 30 people there, and it fluctuates because we have been able to, through the Homeward Bound program and through finding permanent supportive housing and other housing for folks, have been able to transition some folks out of the campsite. So our last point in time count said we had 96 unsheltered people living in San Clemente. Not all of those folks were living in tents. They're living or sleeping, on the sidewalk. Those people aren't going to the shelter. But right now we have 30 people that are at the campsite. So roughly a little under a third of what we had in terms of unsheltered that are there. In terms of where they are?
Yeah, they're still throughout the city. That hasn't changed at all. There have been some individuals in the camp area that were not originally from San Clemente as well. So that has happened, and that we kind of knew that was a possibility, and that has come true as well. But throughout the city, if you're asking for specific locations, I don't have them. But throughout there, they don't have any structures that are erected that they're sleeping in. They're throughout the city.
So I want to, on the heels of that, I want to address, it's a long question. I think I can summarize it as not locals only at campsite. How can we trust what else you say? So the city is trying to limit the campsite to San Clemente homeless. The issue that you have, and I'm going to let Scott touch on this as well, is Laguna Beach, when they first opened their shelter many years ago, said it was going to be Laguna Beach residents only. And they got sued by the ACLU for only limiting it to their residents, and they lost that. So now they've opened that shelter to everyone. There's whether you have a shelter or a campsite, I think the state of the law is that it has to be open to everyone. And the issue is, what we can prevent and prohibit is dumping from other places. So when we get folks at the campsite, we ask them who they are, where they're from, and try to monitor whether it is another city that is dumping them in San Clemente or whether they've come here voluntarily through the bus or the train or otherwise. We cannot stop people from doing that. That is unfortunately the state of the law. As soon as we try to prohibit people, we would get sued and likely lose. So we're walking a tightrope. We're utilizing the resources of FAM with their Homeward Bound program. We're utilizing the resources of Orange County Social Services, trying to find people housing, and as I said, we've had success stories there. But just carte blanche, closing the door and saying San Clemente only if you're not from San Clemente, you can't do that. And
Did you finish the sentence? No. That I couldn't have said it better. In council meetings, what we've been able to say about this, because it is sensitive, is that this is being approached on a case by case. With intake, as people arrive and register and sign in, with law enforcement, with nonprofit contacts with people. And I'm not making light of this, but somebody who slept tonight in where is somebody from if they're homeless? That's kind of the first oxymoron. When they slept in Dana Point last night, in San Clemente tonight, and San Juan the night before that, we don't know what to go with, where they went to high school. And so there's a little bit of that on intake. Well, that won't work. That's not a defensible intake criteria. But they can be asked if they have shelter. And if the city or a partner of the city has identified a home for them, if they weren't evicted and they do in fact have a place to live, then they do not have to have access to our facilities to avoid arrest. So if that's part of the Martin case, is asking whether they have shelter available. How did they get here? If they came on their own volition, that's one thing. If they say, well, I was in Fullerton and the PD picked me up and offered me a ride down here, or the Fullerton's contracting nonprofit brought me down here, that's a big problem. And the sheriff's protocols prohibit that happening from one sheriff contract city to another, and our intake procedures are going to do that. So that's a little bit of an art and not a science to figure out where they came from, how they got here, why they're here, and if alternative shelter is available. But on a case-by-case basis, we're enforcing that and having that dialogue with occupants as they arrive. And again, there are calls to the sheriff, to my office, to the manager's office, to our nonprofit partners as those people come and we have that. So I can't say more than it's a case by case depending on the narrow specific circumstances of everybody who arrives there.
This question is regarding permanent supportive housing. I'm not convinced that shelters are the right answer. Are you considering other solutions like permanent supportive housing and subsidized housing? I want to suggest the city look into the help offered by Community Solutions and Built for Zero.
I think that we need a myriad of shelters, from emergency to interim housing to permanent supportive housing. And personally, You know, we as Homemade in the 30 years that we've been developing housing have to actually stand up against a lot of NIMBYism, people that don't want it in their backyard. And I think we're going to need to realize as a community, as a world, that we need to open our arms and embrace everything that's needed. So people that need permanent supportive housing really need permanent supportive housing. They're not going to be able to function like you and I can. They're not going to be able to pay fair market rent. And we can't leave them sleeping on the street. So I'll handle that one after.
Thank you. So next question for FAM. Can you talk about the difference between enabling and assisting a person and how your organization sees its role?
Okay, good question. Lots of rumors fly around. Bottom line is, enabling is just handing out food and not having a plan with it. You want to have somebody working towards a solution. That's why earlier when I was saying that everybody comes in to FAM for the first time, meets with the case manager, because we need to figure out where they are right then. What is the longer term solution? Is it somebody dealing with mental illness? Is it somebody that's, got that, just that gap is usually what we have, is there's a interim period of time that they need some assistance in order to become stable again. So that's what we see our role as. In the old days, and the old days is 2 years ago, we had a known number of regular homeless. We all knew who they were. They all, they came to FAM, they came to other places. Some didn't come to FAM, but those were our regulars. Something changed about 2 years ago, as we all know. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of new people in town. And I think that's when we went to the city and said, help. What we did doesn't look like it's going to work, because what we don't want to do is have somebody show up in our town and become comfortable being homeless in our town when we don't have the services that we need for those who are already here, right? That's where we launched the Homeward Bound program about 3 years ago. We did that occasionally over the years before that, but that became a full-blown program then, because we realized people are finding themselves stuck here, whether it's somebody gave them a bus pass. We had somebody from Apple Valley do that, to a young man who showed up at our door and I said, what are you doing here? He goes, hey, it's a beautiful day. I go, no, just talk to me. And he said, well, I was in Apple Valley yesterday, and they gave me a bus pass, and here I am. And I said, so, he goes, in fact, I got here last night, and this nice young woman brought me here, and she was also homeless, and said, okay, so can we help you get back to Apple Valley? And he goes, well, I'm not from there, I'm from Washington. Can we help you get back to Washington? Looks down and says, I'm in trouble in Washington. I said, how old are you? 28. But you know how many lifetimes you can live since from 28 to my age? Let us help you get back there, face your trouble, and move on. They still look at you, I'm scared. And I said, all right, I want you to think about where you slept last night, who you slept with. Is that what you want your future to be? He looked up immediately and said, okay, I'll go. So got him with a plan on a bus back to where he came from, but with a plan when he arrived there. So that's what we see our role. How can we help people move from on the streets to somewhere where they have a connection, where they can start working on getting out of the mess they're in? Did I answer that? For whoever asked that question, was that good?
This question is about funding for a shelter, and what grant funding are we pursuing to fund the cost of an emergency temporary homeless shelter, and what agencies are we engaging? I know personally I've asked the city manager to look into grant funds for a shelter. I know HUD, Housing Urban Development, federal level, has a shelter funding program. But I'll have to get an update from him. I did meet with a grant writer that had 30 years experience, and I connected him with the city manager a couple months ago. So I'll find out what an update is on that, and I think we can probably post some of this on the city website. But anyway, so that's to be continued, please, on that one. And then I'm just going to combine this other one on why'd we look at Tustin and Costa Mesa and Anaheim. Are those the only options being considered for a shelter in San Clemente? I believe, I'm trying to think, by the city manager incorporated, I know, Tustin and Costa Mesa into the agenda report, because those are the newest shelters, the most recent ones that were created. So the costs are most relevant to what we would do, but it does not have to look like those shelters. In fact, some residents spoke at 2 meetings ago and provided some really good ideas, and recently emailed the city manager to share those ideas to look into. So we'll be looking into those as well. So we don't have to copy what someone else is doing.
I always have that the county has money as well. There's a plan, it was called I don't know, the Orange County Plan to end homelessness. It was adopted, I think, around 2012. And the county got a bunch of money as a result of that plan. And I know we keep saying regional shelter, and the reason for that is there's a lot more money available for a regional shelter than there is an individual city shelter. In fact, we've unfortunately been told by the county that they won't provide any money unless there is a partnership amongst more than just one city to provide the shelter. So county is another source of that money. But question I have is, it seems like we have programs for people who want and need help. What do you do for all the people who do not want help but want to camp in San Clemente, do drugs, and drink all day? And the second part is, why not move the encampment to an industrial area, already established or zoned, not by multi-million homes that pay the most taxes? So I'm going to start with the second part of that question, because I've heard that a lot. I've gone and spoke to the folks at Sea Summit, and I see some of those folks are here tonight. I empathize, I really do, with the situation. And the reason that lot was chosen is because it is one of the few lots in the city that's zoned for public use, which includes the right to have a homeless shelter there and also put the encampment like we did. It's next to a wastewater treatment plant, so that is an industrial area. And it also has, as Scott said earlier, access to public transit. It's close to where a lot of the folks were already living down in North Beach, and we felt it was the most defensible place for a variety of reasons. And I think it's actually worked out as well as we could have hoped. It's not a perfect fix, but it is an interim solution while we work towards longer term measures. So the folks that are service resistant, I think, is the term. And we do have folks that are service resistant, and that's been a challenge for a variety of reasons. I think folks here have a lot more experience than me and maybe can touch on how you help with that so that I don't fall all over myself trying to explain it.
So I'll be pretty candid. At Mercy House, we refuse to use the term service resistant. We hold ourselves to a higher standard in our engagement with clients and understand, looking at best practices across the nation, that it is a long-term relationship at times that takes a lot of work and a lot of creativity. We believe that there is an option for everyone. It may not be the first option that we provide them with, but we believe that there is an opportunity for everyone to be receiving a service that meets their needs, and maybe we're just not offering the right service at the right time. And that's where the outreach effort being, again, that longer term engagement and the time that we're engaging with them varies from one individual to another.
Okay, this question is the city still moving forward as indicated by Ms. Ferguson and Mayor Pro Tem Dan on housing a temporary permanent shelter near Family Assistance Ministries? And Family Assistance Ministry is in a city-owned building. They lease from the city of San Clemente, and it is in the SB2 zone. It's a commercial zone. So that is the area where the city of San Clemente is looking for placement of a temporary emergency shelter. So yes.
So I think this is a question for Fam Mercy House. Where do I take an abused woman who begged for help and screams she is scared and afraid at the temp encampment on Pico? Question mark. Return her. Says, I think, written, no one has answered my calls, or when no one has answered my calls. I don't know. Doesn't say who's been called.
Can you say the last part of it?
Return her, question mark. Basically what you do with an abused woman who...
Well, Laura's house is a place that I would call. I would call the sheriff's department. I would ask for a deputy to come out. If you've got somebody who is that fearful and screaming, it sounds like there may be some additional issues going on. And that also, at that point, the sheriffs would figure out whether or not they would need to call out a CAT team from the county, which would do a mental health evaluation. But in the meantime, they could be contacting Laura's house, who is a domestic violence shelter.
That didn't work.
sometimes
That
that,
didn't work. That, we called them, and she still has nowhere to go. And it's 7:40, and we don't know where to take her.
oh, this is a issue right now.
Right now.
Excellent question. Yeah.
Your house.
Jump into action.
We probably called 30 agencies today. And they went to Pam in person.
So spam is full, I know our shelters are full. Right? I don't know, but basically, there are times when we'll put people in a motel. If we have the funds available to do that in the interim, I know that we have done it, and the city has done it, I'm sure other agencies have done it. Where is she right now?
Right here.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna go talk to her.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Can we make mandatory the Dave Ramsey financial program in our high schools to teach financing, so maybe people do not become homeless? Too many people have no clue how to do personal finances, so let's prevent this at an early age. They did used to teach personal finance in high school. I took that. I serve on the CUSD ad hoc committee, so I'll bring that up to the school district as an idea, so thank you for suggesting that.
So this is a panel question. Is there any agency in San Clemente or in County of Orange that helps the homeless with personal hygiene, prepping for job interviews, and help in filling out a job application? I think Mary touched on that earlier, but is there any other resources agency? I know
I Hope has a shower trailer, so they're going to do that. Job training happens, I think, depending on individual basis. I don't know about Mercy House, but FAM also has some of that, and I think that's an excellent question, and I'll pass over.
So we do use the established resources within South County to make referrals. Mercy Health provides the foundational conversation, but we don't necessarily have that service as part of our portfolio, so we're relying on partners like FAM, who does host those sites. South County Outreach is also another who does computer training and resume building, along with IHOP.
And I just want to add to that, that is part of the challenge, is where do we put a shower trailer? IHOP's got a mobile one, but the problem has been in the past, they haven't been able to find a place in San Clemente to park it to have that happen. And so that is something I'd like to open back up, is if we can have that happen to the website.
Okay, Pastor Boss, I will follow up with the city manager, because Kathy Dominici actually suggested I hope could bring the mobile showers, and I did provide that to the city manager, so I'll follow up where he is on that. Mary, did you have some input on that as well?
Well, I didn't hear the whole question, but I heard it was about employment services.
Job skills.
Okay, so we do have a Get Ready, Get Second Hired employment program, and it's a one-on-one thing. We tried to, someone set up a 4-week program. It was awesome. It was, and the very first of the 4 weeks, someone raised their hand and said, I don't care, I don't want to learn about that, I just want a job. And went, changed the program immediately. So one-on-one job searching. We also partner with One Stop and other agencies that will help.
That's great, thank you. All right, I'm going to combine these two questions. One is no regional shelter, and one is regional shelter. What is the status of a regional shelter, and where do our neighboring cities stand on this? And Mayor Pro Tem Bain mentioned earlier that he and I have had one meeting so far with a couple members from Dana Point City Council and one from San Juan City Council, and we've met individually with them over the last months too. So we're going to continue those discussions and meetings and work on a regional approach. And the other question is, wouldn't a smaller shelter in each community be more efficient than a large regional one? Every city needs one. So we'll see how that goes, because we certainly know that a regional shelter will take time and money and other types of logistics and politics involved in that. So we definitely have to do something at the interim with the temporary emergency local shelter. So do you have any?
Sure, so I'll touch on that as well. A lot of the model has been these regional shelters of shared resources. Shelters are incredibly expensive, especially when you're looking at a city of our size, 65,000 people. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with the microphone. So once you open a shelter as a city, you own the shelter, all the liability that comes with it, all of the issues, litigation. There's been a lot of litigation over the years. You can just look no further than Laguna Beach at their shelter and all of the issues that they've had to deal with. I've heard that Costa Mesa, with their new shelter, is about to be sued again. So part of what we're trying to do as your council and with the help of the city attorney is to do a cost-benefit analysis, not just looking at is it most efficient to open a shelter, but long-term, is that a sustainable model given our budget? And we're leaning heavily in of what we know in Orange County, which is Laguna Beach and Tustin and Costa Mesa and those shelters, to look at what is the best option. So you know, I deal with a lot of very complex issues in my profession as a lawyer, and I think this is about the most complex of all the issues I've ever had to deal with. It is incredibly complex, and so we're trying to be careful, not just in terms of the type of shelter, but the financial resources we're committing ourselves to going forward with our partners. And I think the other question was, how willing are the other cities to join resources? I think a lot of the cities in South Orange County realize that we're relatively small cities, and there's a lot more economies of scale if we join together to share resources. So that's been the thought process in my experience with a lot of the different electeds from South Orange County. So this question is, what regulations are in place to keep homeless from venturing into neighborhood communities? I assume they mean residential.
Yeah, and Chief Ad, if you want, Lieutenant. The Lieutenant already mentioned trespass. So if somebody's on private property or on an HOA or private commercial owners association's property, then they can be cited for trespass. But walking up and down public streets is something that everybody has to be able to do. The city, when it opened the transitional campground at the yard, adopted house rules for the occupants there that have to do with coming and going, noise, lights out, maintenance of your site. And the council asked that we bring those back, and the sheriff asked too, that we bring those back as codified provisions of the municipal code. So on Tuesday night, those house rules will become part of the city's municipal code, and they will then make it a citable offense to violate those rules. That doesn't have to do with just walking down a public street, but to the extent that there's noise, trespass, encroachment, boisterousness, fights at the transitional site, then that'll now be something that's a criminal violation citable under the municipal code as of Tuesday night, if the council passes that.
Just questions regarding council meetings. I would like to see the specific topics be added to every city council meeting going forward. Can these be added to the agenda? The status of screening homeless candidates for the Pico tent area, the status of regional shelter options or temporary shelter in San Clemente, the status of removing Judge Carter recusal, and status of Ed Ward proposal to donate land. That's the 10 acres owned by the Rancho San Clemente Business Park. We actually started at the last council meeting, just a static like the toll road update. We have a regular homeless issues update on the council meeting agenda, so we'll definitely include these in our updates at each council meeting. So thank you.
And then I think this will be final questions, so we can kind of get into our closing remarks. But Chief, last but not least for you. So we have dual enforcement. Homeless are getting away with breaking our laws. OCSD and CC, City Council, say it isn't happening, but we are all seeing it. So would you like to start with your perception of that issue, and then I'll...
There are laws being broken, and our deputies are actively enforcing those laws. And to counter that, I have numerous citations that have come across my desk. I have booking paperwork for people who were arrested. So I'm not sure where this person got that information, but we are actively out there enforcing the laws. every law? Have we caught every criminal? No, we have not. And are there times that you will see other issues happening? They're defecating in public, urinating, drinking. Occasionally, you're going to see that. And I ask you to report it, not on social media. You have a right to do that, but please call me, call the department so a deputy can respond and address the issue. But it is a large city, and there are other things that are going on as well, and my deputies will get there, and they will enforce it. And I assure you that is happening.
Sure. And at the city level, I can say we've not shackled anyone in terms of enforcement of our code or laws. We've asked for all codes, municipal or otherwise, state laws that can be enforced, that they should be enforced to the extent they can be. So things like status, crimes, camping, we're not enforcing if people are just sleeping out in public, or if somebody's just walking around the city like you or I could do. You know, whether they're homeless or not, they have every right to be there as much as you or I. So we're not enforcing those types of things, but drugs, alcohol, open use, stealing, property crimes, those are all being enforced in the same manner to everyone else. So I know there's questions in the back and people want to ask them. We're going to go ahead and close for now. We'll stick around a bit if you want to ask questions. I want to, first of all, can I just go ahead and start closing? I want to thank our panelists. They were invited to be here. They did not have to be here. They donated their time to be away from their families, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate their willingness to be here. It's not easy to sit up and not know what questions and things like that are going to get thrown at you, or how the crowd is going to be. So I next want to thank you for being respectful. These were great questions. We did not get to all of them, and as I promised, we will answer these and put these on the city website. So if your question was not answered, it will be. So again, thank you, and I want to especially thank Laura Ferguson. We're saying we're co-hosting this, but Laura did the lion's share of the work with our Human Affairs Committee, with Tyler Bowden and Paula Cole and Bill, and just many Saturday meetings. And Laura works a full-time job, has kids. How she finds the time, I don't know. But I want to commend her for really spearheading this as well.
Thank you. And I wanted to mention also, Mayor Pro Tem Bain and I, we are the subcommittee on addressing homelessness in San Clemente. And we talked about the last meeting about having a task force on homelessness. I know other cities do, including our neighbor Dana Point. They have an advisory council on homelessness. And I've already heard from 6 people since that meeting just talking about coordinating this that want to be on that task force. So we'll get together, Mayor Pro Tem Bain and I, and with these people, these 6 people that have expressed interest, and then I'll bring it back to the next meeting in City Council comments, and maybe we can get something formal going for those of you that might be interested in joining us, because this is a long-term effort for us. It's certainly something that's going to take a lot of time. So I appreciate you coming out tonight and being part of this and caring to find solutions with us. And, oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Some information that will keep this issue on the forefront is upcoming Human Affairs Committee workshops. They're going to be having mini forums on various topics relating to homelessness, including, I think they're looking to do some on housing and mental illness, and they'll get together as a committee, and we'll help advertise those on the city website and on social media. So we hope you'll stay engaged, and if you know people that could be potential speakers with expertise, please reach out to the city, to us, or the Human Affairs Committee. So we need all hands on deck to address this issue. So thank you. All right, have a great night.